So when you're a young musician coming up, it's kind of natural to focus on single things and like, you want to get a foothold, a toehold in this universe of music. And so it makes tons of sense at that age and at that point of experience to, like focus in on one thing and kind of dismiss everything else. And, young musicians tend to be very dismissive of, because you don't know everything yet. You haven't been exposed to stuff. You haven't figured out how things connect and like that. So it's perfectly natural to just like this one thing and just play this one instrument and, get really involved with that one thing so you have some sort of confidence about what you're doing in music. If you're like 18 and you're just generalist and you can't do anything that, really shows some expertise, everybody's going to dismiss your shit, right? So you got to kind of lock in on something and prove yourself. And so that's good, and that's a perfectly reasonable phase of development. Sadly, what tends to happen around that is that people stick with that. They keep this intense loyalty to what they liked when they started, and there's nothing wrong with the loyalty of it. There is something wrong with the closed-mindedness that may come out around that. And that ends up being a sort of feedback loop and a self-perpetuating thing, is because other musicians do that too. So you play with people that like the same stuff as you do and dismiss the same stuff as you do. So that if you're, like a guitar player in a rock band, you won't listen to a lot of string quartets or, pay enough attention to film music or, whatever it is. And that's something that I think it might be wise to consciously fight yourself against. Like if you find yourself tending to like wanting to stay in this safe place where you're in command of your instrument and you're in command of whatever style you've adopted, I'm a punk man, I don't play anything that doesn't sound like punk, or like, I make noise, man, like fuck music, it's like, that makes perfect sense when you're just learning about that and doing that. But like a couple of years down the road, like that's kind of self-limiting and self-defeating in a way. It's like preventing you from learning about other stuff. So that the more that you just listen and listen and listen and find out, if there's something that you really don't like, that's maybe something you should expose yourself to more and try to understand. Like you should try to really understand why you don't like it and try to understand what they're doing in that, what's going on in this? I know I don't like it, but is it offending me because it's crappy, or is it offending me because it's threatening my sense of security? And I find thinking back on when I was young, I would dismiss a lot of things because I knew I wouldn't be able to do them. In all honesty, it's, I'd be like, fuck that shit, it's bourgeois or whatever. And, what I was really saying is whoever's doing this knows a whole lot of stuff that I don't know. And so, like, if I treat that with some kind of equality and acceptance, I'm like, making myself feel small, which as a young, defensive, underconfident kind of person, that's a threat instead of an opportunity. As you grow along and you've developed some security in what you do, you don't have to feel threatened by stuff you don't know anymore. That provides you with an opportunity to learn things. It's great to be curious all the time, but sometimes too, like, sometimes too, it's really important to focus on what you're doing and really get that. You know, it's you know, everybody probably had some genius math teacher who would draw these long equations on the blackboard and get 2 + 3 = 6 somewhere in them and fuck the whole thing up because they weren't like, you know, they were skipping over steps that seemed trivial to them. And, you know, and that sort of, you know, that sort of happens with musicians too, is like you might think some stuff is trivial and not learn how to do it or not understand it, and, you know, that'll end up hanging you up somewhere along the line. So it's good to do that sort of monomaniacal, like concentrated thing, but it's also really important to keep that breathing, you know, and not suffocate into that. And I find that's what happens with a lot of musicians over time. You know, now that I'm old enough, I've watched people go through generational stuff, you know, several generations now. And so many people that you like knew when you were 20 and were so talented and so imaginative and stuff like that, they just flatline after a while. And I don't think they flatline because of something intrinsically lacking in themselves. I think they flatline more often because they get stuck in a style or stuck on an instrument and stuck with that feeling of security of knowing what they're doing and not challenging themselves into doing something else, you know, not letting their imagination breathe, in other words, you know. So, you know, if you find yourself getting stale in something, you know, do something else, you know, like Coach Jamil Moondock, do some different shit, man, you know, and it's good to do that, you know, like don't cling to your security blanket, you know, like, you know, be willing to open up and challenge yourself to other things. And you don't have to keep doing them, but like, you know, maybe it really did just suck, you know, and the reason you didn't like it, you know, like, I never liked pop music all that much after I got to be like 15 or whatever, you know, it just seemed like fuzzy warbles to me and stuff like that. And so I didn't pay much attention to it for a long time. And and then after a while, just kind of, I don't know, just to be silly, I started more examining, their chord progressions and things like that, and saying, oh, this has some cleverness around it, and, you know, this is useful. And isn't it funny that the same thing pops up in stuff that non-pop music does? And that sort of surprised me at the time I learned it, that there's actually things worth learning about in this. You know, so for a few years I just learned, like, I don't know, a couple of thousand songs or something like that, you know, and just 'cause, you know, and it had nothing to do with what I was doing at the time, you know. I was playing very experimental music at that time. But I just go home and figure out some song, you know, by like Robbie Robertson or Bob Dylan or whoever, you know, just some song. And it was kind of fun and useful, you know, if there were people hanging around, you know, I could play this on the guitar and I knew it, and like, you know, and I could figure out almost any other pop song, you know, from learning all those songs. Like, the vocabulary isn't very big, so somebody says, oh, I really want to know this song, and you go, oh, that just goes like this, you know. And so it's more useful than you think. And, you know, and to be honest, like, musically speaking, this was not something I had great respect for or anything like that, but you find little tricks within this stuff to do to make it sound better, and it's, you know, and that ends up being important while you're playing free jazz or something. You have no idea, you know, like anything that, you know, I don't know, since then my attitude's been like that anybody that adds anything to the musical vocabulary, to your personal, they may be deriving it off from somewhere else, but anything that adds something to your musical vocabulary is a valuable thing. You can't ever really know enough. So, just pick it up and pick it up and pick it up, and don't be defensive about it. That the thing that'll limit you more than anything else, in music is your own limitations that you put on yourself and that you put on your own curiosity and imagination, Yeah, I could babble about this for like 4 hours, but I think that kind of covers it.